Hello, we have been discussing about the paper Introduction to Philosophy, which has been introduced as the discipline-specific core paper in semester 1 offered by the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi. We continue our discussions further on the various themes of epistemology, metaphysics and philosophy as such in our today's lecture. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Now, we have understood this much, that metaphysics, epistemology and philosophy as a method are intertwined. So, when we pick up Pritchard's text, what is this thing called philosophy, we see that Pritchard emphasizes that philosophy uses conceptual analysis, arguments, thought experiments. Similarly, we also find that in Indian philosophy uses Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, and which is basically listening, reflection and realization. Or we also have debate or the Vada and logical reasoning. Both traditions show that existence is not a simple factual claim but a philosophical problem. The question of existence is central to both metaphysics and epistemology. Metaphysics, as explained, investigates what kinds of things exist and the fundamental nature of reality. It distinguishes between different modes of existence such as concrete and abstract entities and debates realism and anti-realism. Indian philosophy similarly distinguishes between Sat and Asat. In Advaita Vedanta, Brahman alone is ultimately real, while the empirical world is mithya, echoing the metaphysical idea of levels of reality. So, epistemology, discussed by Duncan Pritchard, examines how we know what exists. Skeptical challenges question whether our beliefs about the external world are justified. This parallels the Indian concept of avidya, where ignorance leads to false beliefs about reality. Buddhist philosophy further challenges existence by arguing that all entities are empty or shunya of self-existence and arise dependently. Thus, both Western and Indian philosophies treat existence as a complex metaphysical and epistemological issue rather than a simple fact. So, the question of existence lies at the very epicenter of both metaphysics and epistemology. If we see in the West, where they talk about JTB or justified true belief, even in East or Buddhist philosophy, we find the introduction of the doctrine of shunyata, where all phenomena, it is said, lacks intrinsic existence and arises dependently. This resonates with anti-realist and relational views of existence in Western philosophy. Some of the critical insight now that we must take note of is what is the question of existence and how do we tackle it? What the question of existence really is. At a critical level, the question of existence is not merely about listing what exists, but about examining the grounds on which existence claims are made. When philosophy asks what exists, it is simultaneously asking, is existence a mind-independent fact or a concept-dependent claim? Do all entities exist in the same way, or are there degrees or modes of existence? Is existence something that can be known or only assumed? And we had seen in the previous class how Christy Miller's metaphysics makes it clear that existence is a theoretical commitment, not a self-evident truth. To say that something exists is to adopt a particular ontological framework. This already introduces uncertainty and disagreement, making existence a problem, not a given. Thus, existence is not discovered like a physical object. It is argued for, conceptualized, and then justified. Thus, we see, the question, why does the question even becomes philosophically difficult? It is because metaphysics and epistemology pulls in different directions. Metaphysics may claim that reality exists independent of us. Epistemology questions whether we can ever know this with certainty. And we have seen how there has been skeptical challenges undermining our confidence in existed claims. So if perception can deceive us, if justification can fail, then even the existence of the external world becomes philosophically unstable. And this, we see the problem of existence persists because our access to reality is always mediated by perception, language, concepts, and cultural frameworks. So philosophy does not solve the question of existence in a final sense. Instead, it tackles it through layered strategies. Conceptual clarification should be made here, where philosophy first asks, what do we mean by existence? Is existence property, predicate, condition? And then that step continues to go on, where we then have in the second step ontological framework, where these frameworks allow philosophy to accommodate diversity without collapsing into relativism. The third is epistemic humility. So instead of defeating skepticism entirely, contemporary philosophy says that accepts limits of certainty, emphasizes fallibilism where knowledge can be revised, grounds existence claims in practical, contextual, or ethical life. This aligns with Indian traditions where liberation is not mere belief but transformative understanding. Thus, the strength of the philosophical approach lies in its refusal of easy answers. However, Western metaphysics sometimes risks over abstraction, losing lived reality. Indian metaphysics may risk over transcendence, dissolving the world too quickly. A balanced approach recognizes that existence is both experienced and interpreted, both lived and theorized. Ultimately, the question of existence is less about what the world is and more about how humans relate to reality. Philosophy tackles it not by closing the question, but by keeping it open, disciplined, and meaningful. The philosophical problem of existence endures not because reality is inaccessible, but because human understanding is always situated between being and knowing. So the framework that we get is being or metaphysics is at the onset, followed by epistemology or knowing, and further the directionality going towards philosophical method. It is just not a slogan, being, knowing, philosophical method. It is a methodological movement. So methodology of the question of existence will be from being to knowing to further down philosophical method. And what exactly the philosophy does here? So philosophy begins by suspending ordinary assumptions under the first phase, which is from being, and asking what kinds of things exist, what counts as real, are there different levels or modes of existence? This is not observation but ontological framing. The method has been what we call as ontological analysis. Entities like objects, minds, numbers, values, they classify them to concrete, abstract, dependent, independent. Then they further ask what must be the case for them to exist. For example, a table exists physically. A number exists abstractly. A dream exists experientially. So physically, abstractly, experientially are the various ontological analyses. Thus, the methodological insight is existence is approached through theoretical models, not sense data alone. Then comes the second stage of transition to knowing, the epistemic check. Once something is said to exist, philosophy asks a second methodological question. On what grounds do we claim to know this? Why this step is necessary? Ontological claims without epistemic justification risks dogmatism. Here we use what is called as epistemic evaluation. It examines sources of beliefs, perception, reason, testimony. It tests reliability. It introduces skeptical challenges. So skeptical arguments like illusion, dream, brain in a vat, or justification analysis like what counts as good reason does have an Indian parallel of Advaita in Avidya's ignorance, which explains false ontological claims, or Pramanavada, or the means of knowledge, or that tests truth claims. So we see that philosophy does not accept existence claims unless they survive epistemic scrutiny. Now, the philosophical method proper, the last stage, how philosophy handles this tension. Now comes the core methodological layer, how philosophy works when being and non-knowing clash. So the conceptual analysis, what it does, it breaks down vague concepts, the existence, reality, truth, and asks whether existence is a property or a condition. Why it matters? It does because many disputes are verbal or conceptual, not factual. For example, Immanuel Kant's existence is not a real predicate. Advaita Vedanta's existence is not a property of objects but of Brahman. And methodologically, philosophy cleans the conceptual ground. So we see that there could be certain thought experiments, the testing intuitions, where hypothetical scenarios that tests our beliefs, brain in a vat, dream argument, Buddhist chariot analogy, all these exposes hidden assumptions, shows limits of perception-based knowledge. Methodologically, philosophy uses imaginative reasoning under logical control. Also, we must understand the argumentation and the counter-argument method used in philosophy, where claims must be argued, objections must be answered, no appeal to authority or mere belief. So the structure is firstly state a thesis, give reasons, address objections, refine the position. This mirrors what we call as Vada in Indian philosophy, dialectic in Western philosophy, and methodologically, philosophy advances through reasoned disagreement. So there will be disagreements. Disagreements are necessary, but disagreements are not to compete with the other. It is in a way to expand and filter what is episteme from doxa. So when conflicts persist, philosophy blossoms, for it introduces levels of explanation, accepts contextual validity. For example, empirical versus ultimate reality, conventional versus ultimate truth, common sense versus philosophical skepticism. Methodologically, philosophy avoids both naive realism and total skepticism. Philosophy does not aim at final answers but at coherence, conceptual clarity, rational responsibility. The methodology ensures that existence claims are not arbitrary, knowledge claims are accountable, disagreements remain productive. So, what we find is the philosophical method treats existence neither as a brute fact, not as a mere illusion, but as a claim that must pass through ontological framing, epistemic justification, and conceptual clarification. Philosophy approaches existence by moving from what is claimed to what exists, to how such claims are known, and finally to how such claims are meaningfully argued and justified. So, what we are hoping here is that by now all of you should be in a position to understand the question of existence in terms of metaphysics and epistemology, be in a position to explain Pritchard's treatment of knowledge, skepticism and philosophical method, and applied the methodology of being, knowing and philosophical method with a comparison of Indian and Western. So, Pritchard, now the references are extremely important. Here one should be referring to Duncan Pritchard, where he has emphasized that philosophy starts by clarifying what we are talking about. So, identify what is said to exist and in what sense. Ask if existence is independent of the mind. Distinguish types of entities, concrete like tables, bodies, tablets, abstracts, numbers, time, space, experiential like dreams, hallucinations. So that will be the first stage where you are engaging with something which is the metaphysical domain or the domain of being. And Pritchard was very right when he said that Western metaphysics classifies existence to clearly ontological commitments. Miller, however, added that ontological claims are theoretical, so claiming existence involves or should involve philosophical responsibility. Then the second stage or stage 2 should be where you are talking about the epistemological evaluation. Here again you would be referring to what is knowledge of Pritchard, and you should ask yourself, or rather as a student of philosophy start asking in the second stage, the epistemology or the knowing part. How can I know that what exists exists? So knowledge you will find is traditionally taken as justified true belief, but justification can fail. So introduce skeptical challenges, illusions, dreams, brain invade, and emphasize on fallibilism, that knowledge is never absolutely certain. And we find that skeptical scenarios force us to examine our confidence in existence claims. Knowledge of existence is not naive, it is critically tested. So, at this stage, in the second stage of epistemology of what is knowledge, students should be in a comfortable position to ask, can we ever be 100% sure that the world exists outside our mind? Use this to highlight the philosophical method. Then comes our stage 3, which is the philosophical method. Here again, Pritchard's work, where he tackles existence with his reference text, what is this thing called philosophy, comes handy. And by now, the student should be in a well-equipped position to clarify key concepts, existence, reality, truth, mind independence, to resolve verbal or conceptual confusion. For instance, one can also look up further Immanuel Kant's existence is not a predicate, or if you're interested in Indian parallels, Advaita Vedanta's existence is not a property of objects but of Brahman. So we find that test believes under imaginative scenarios, and from the examples from Duncan Pritchard's, brain in a vat, the dream argument, and so on and so forth, there will be skeptical arguments about the external world, and this is how you connect. Finally, we'll come to the stage of argumentation and dialectic, where you will have to state the thesis, give reasons, consider objections, refine the position. We also have in Indian parallel the structured debate, the Vada and the Tarka. We also find that philosophy accepts contextual truth to avoid naive realism or total skepticism. Contextualism is the key position where a certain context which can be justified true belief in one may not be in somewhere else. So, inclusion of this is very crucial to be contextually sensitive. Thus, the last part of our discussion then is why does this methodology, which is critical, emphasize even meta? So, understand that existence is just not about fact, it is conceptual and a claim which is epistemic. Philosophy tests and justifies rather than just asserting existence. And philosophical reasoning progresses through argument and refinement, not mere observation. So existence claims are meaningful only when examined through ontological framing, which is being, epistemic justification, which is knowing, and rigorous argumentation, which is method. Some of the important discussion questions where one ought to be interested at this point of time are questions like, can we ever fully know that the external world exists? Comparing Advaita's mithya with Western skepticism, how do thought experiments help us clarify existential claims? So philosophy approaches existence through a structured methodology, first clarifying what is claimed to exist. And this is where we start with metaphysics, or the question of ontos, or the question of being. Secondly, it examines how such claims can be known. And the minute the how comes to the picture, it is all about justification. It is all about reasoning. It is all about the reasons, the logics provided. And for this, we come to the level of epistemology. For epistemology is about knowledge. Further down, we further analyze and defend them through argument, through conceptual clarification, and through experiments. This is where we enter into the philosophical method module. So all in all, about existence, we can say that existence is not about merely being present, or merely being absent, or merely being illusory, or merely being out there. No, it is not about bhava or abhava, but it is a culmination of these three steps. Many people take them to be separate from each other: metaphysics, epistemology, and the philosophical method. But then we understand that metaphysics can exist, and we can talk about what exists in the epistemic world or in the language world only because there is the theme of epistemology. Similarly, about the theme of epistemology, we can only work when we know that we have powerful tools to analyze, to defend. And when we are analyzing and defending or seeking for clarifications, remember, we are just not doing it for assertions or for making statements or for just putting a fact out there the way scientists does. No, that is not our methodology. Our methodology would be to see, check, argue, counter-argue, debate, and clarify. This is where we enter into the domain of the philosophical method, which is the last method called the philosophy. So very rightly, the epistemologists, especially Duncan Pritchard here, who has been the central protagonist as a reference point for our Unit 1 topic on existence, emphasizes that skepticism, fallibilism, and reasons debates are central to this process, bridging Western and Indian perspectives on existence. So as much as there are the concepts or categories of the West, there are also the categories from the East. And we did pick up the Advaita Vedanta's concept of mithya and avidya, or so that matter Buddhists' shunyata or pratitya samutpada, to show that fallibilism, or so that matter verification. In fact, this reminds one of the theory of falsifiability, which was considered as an opposite method to the principle of verification. Now, verifiability or falsifiability cannot be taken as oxymorons or cannot be taken as theses and antitheses. Rather, they are both methods to have the litmus test checked of making a sentence come out as a verified proposition. So whether Some methodology chooses the process of verifiability, whether it goes via the method of falsifiability, it is not much important. What is important is how rigorous has our entire exercise been. And in this exercise, please understand, unlike the scientists, we are not interested in looking for solutions. Solution is the domain of the scientists. Our emphasis is to raise questions. Our emphasis is to raise questions and seek conceptual clarity. Our emphasis is to seek conceptual clarity not just merely, but through rigorous argument, through robust conceptual clarifications, and through n number of thought experiments, so that whatever have been put out to us, we further take it with a pinch of salt. And this is how philosophy or philosophers will never see epistemology, or as of that matter, firstly metaphysics or being, epistemology or knowing, and the method of philosophy or the very process of knowing as divorced from each other. Rather, they are interconnected, and this interconnection helps us to have a grasp of what the question that we have been dealing in as to what is existence. To summarize, existence is not a brute fact. It is a conceptual and epistemic claim. And philosophy tests and justifies. It is not just doing the job of assertion or asserting existence, not at all. And our philosophers like Christy Miller, Duncan Pritchard have time and again shown to us how philosophical reasoning can only progress when there is argument and refinement and just not mere observation. Thus, existence claims will be meaningful, should be meaningful, only when we take them through the journey of ontological framing, epistemic justification, and rigorous argumentation. Thus, in today's lecture, we have tried to discuss the idea or the concept of existence vis-a-vis following the three parallels. Stage 1 was about the being framing or metaphysics. Stage 2 was about the epistemological framing or what is knowing about being, and stage 3 has been about the philosophical method. And those enthusiasts who are interested in Indian philosophy should definitely check out Advaita Vedanta's Brahman as ultimately real, or the empirical world, as mithya. Brahman Satya Jagat Mithya Jiva Brahmava Naparaha. So all those who are interested there can go and get a taste of what is real and what is dependent. And as such, we find that all these stages, be it the being stage, the metaphysical or the epistemological stage, or the philosophical module stage of what is existence, are interconnected, and they should not be taken or seen as separate from each other. Thank you so much.